Okay, so I need to tell you something about today. And honestly, I think it might completely change how you look at everything that's about to unfold this week. Because while everyone has been caught up in how relentless this year has felt, there's actually a very specific reason why. And today is when things finally start to make sense. Because something is shifting right now and you need to know about it before it hits. On April 1st, 2026, Mercury stations retrograde at 15 degrees Aries. And I know what some of you are thinking. Another Mercury retrograde? Great. But stay with me, because this one is not like the others. This isn't just a communication slowdown or a reason to back up your files. This is what I'd call a forced reckoning, a cosmic full stop arriving exactly when the noise has gotten too loud to ignore. And here's what's really getting my attention. We're right at the beginning of Aries season, this raw, aggressive, forward-charging energy. And Mercury is choosing this exact moment to stop dead in its tracks at 15 degrees, right in the heart of Aries. That is not a coincidence. That is the universe slamming the brakes on momentum that was never fully conscious to begin with. But before I get into the 3 specific areas of your life that are about to be completely rerouted by this station, and trust me, you're going to want to hear this, there's something really important I need you to understand first. Because if you've been feeling scattered lately, like your thoughts are too loud and your decisions feel unstable, stay right here with me. There's a very specific reason that's been happening and I'm going to walk you through it in just a moment. But first, let me paint the full picture of what's actually been building up to this, because I don't think you can feel the weight of today without understanding the intensity we've all been moving through. This year has not been gentle, and that is not an overstatement. Let's be honest. 2026 so far has felt like being shoved forward at full speed with no time to think. And if you've been feeling that way, you are absolutely not alone. This has not been a subtle, slow-moving season. This has been the kind of energy that demands action, demands courage, demands that you put yourself out there before you even feel ready. It started with Aries season, igniting everything. Your ambitions, your impulses, your need to break out of whatever has been holding you back. And that fire doesn't just burn clean, it burns through things. It burns through relationships, through plans, through identities. And the question is, what's left standing when the smoke clears? Because that's what Mercury retrograde at 15 degrees Aries is about to reveal. Mercury stationed retrograde today, right now. And the signs that are going to feel this the most, Aries, Libra, and Capricorn, are already in the middle of it. If you're one of those signs, you've probably already been feeling the pressure building. That sense that something is about to shift, but you can't quite name what it is yet. That sense that the words aren't coming out right. That sense that something you thought was settled is actually still unresolved. That's not in your head. That's Mercury telling you the truth. Does that resonate? But here's what I think is really happening, and this was a big realization for me. All of this urgency, all of this forward motion, all of this Aries-fueled need to push and prove and launch and begin. It's been happening without the reflection that makes it actually land. Mercury retrograde at 15 degrees. Aries is not here to destroy your momentum. It's here to make sure your momentum is built on something real. Because right now, today, is when we stop. Not forever. But long enough to look at what we've been doing and ask, is this actually what I want? Is this actually working? Or have I just been moving fast enough that I didn't have to face the answer? So here's what most people get wrong about Mercury retrograde in Aries. And I think this misunderstanding causes a lot of unnecessary fear. When you hear Mercury retrograde, you might think, disaster, confusion, chaos, don't sign contracts, don't start anything new. And sure, some of that applies. But the deeper truth of Mercury in Aries retrograde, it's about reclaiming your voice. It's about going back to the conversations, the decisions, the identities you moved away from too fast. It's about cutting through the noise and the performance and getting back to what you actually think, what you actually feel, what you actually need. Aries is the sign of the self. It's raw, unfiltered personal truth. And when Mercury retrogrades here, it's inviting you, actually it's demanding you, to go back and re-examine how honestly you've been representing yourself in your relationships, in your work, in the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. And that's exactly what today is offering. After weeks of firing forward, after all that Aries ignition energy pushing you to act and assert and begin, Mercury retrograde is arriving like a mirror, clear-eyed, unsparing, asking you to look at what you've actually built. This is what I mean by a forced reckoning. It's not a dramatic explosion. It's not a sudden collapse. It's something quieter, but far more powerful. And it's the moment where the internal voice you've been drowning out with busyness finally gets loud enough to hear. It says, wait, look at this. Look at what you're really saying. Look at what you're really choosing. And what makes this particularly significant? Mercury is stationing at exactly 15 degrees Aries, the midpoint of the sign. This isn't the beginning of a new chapter in Aries. This is the middle of one you're already in. So the question this retrograde is asking isn't where do I go from here? It's what have I already set in motion that needs to be examined more honestly? This is the pivot. This is the moment the trajectory shifts. And I believe that for the signs most impacted, Aries, Libra, and Capricorn, this is the beginning of one of the most clarifying periods of the year. But here's the part that I think is so crucial. And this is what I wanted to tell you earlier about why your thoughts have felt so unstable and loud. The disruption isn't happening because everything is about to fall apart. The disruption is happening because your current speed has been protecting you from a truth you're not quite ready to face. The pattern you've been carrying and why it's finally surfacing. Remember when I said there's a specific reason you've been feeling scattered and unmoored? This is it. And I really need you to sit with this because I think it's at the center of what this retrograde is here to address. Now, the shadow side of Aries, the toxic expression of all that fire, is this belief that slowing down means losing, that pausing means weakness, that if you're not moving, not asserting, not initiating, you're falling behind. Does that sound familiar? Because for a lot of us, especially Aries, Libra, and Capricorn, this belief has been driving things for a long time. We've been launching without thinking, saying things without meaning them, moving into situations at full speed because the alternative, stopping, reflecting, reconsidering, feels like failure. And Mercury stationing retrograde today, right in the heart of Aries, is forcing a confrontation with that pattern. It's showing us exactly where we've been reactive instead of intentional, where we've spoken from ego instead of from truth. One where we've started things that weren't actually aligned with who we are, just because we wanted to feel like we were doing something. That's been painful to look at. I know it has. It's been uncomfortable for me too. That recognition that some of the forward motion has actually been a form of avoidance. But this Mercury retrograde, today, right now, this is when we finally get to do something about it. This is when we get to go back, revisit, reconsider, and repair. The forced reckoning isn't about punishment. It's about alignment. It's about reclaiming the parts of your voice and your truth that got lost in the rush. And this recalibration is going to show up in 3 very specific, very tangible areas of your life. Areas where you've probably been operating on autopilot, areas where something has felt slightly off, but you've been moving too fast to address it. Area 1, your communication is about to be completely overhauled, and it's long overdue. Okay, so the first area that's getting rerouted right now, today, with Mercury stationing, is how you communicate. What you say, how you say it, what you've left unsaid, and what you've said that you didn't actually mean. And for Aries, Libra, and Capricorn especially, I think this is going to be the most immediate shift. Here's what I've been noticing, and I've heard this from so many people lately. Things have been getting lost in translation. Conversations have been landing wrong. You say one thing and people hear something completely different. Or you've been holding something back that really needs to be said, but every time you try, it doesn't come out right. Has that been you? I really believe this is because we've been communicating at the speed of Aries energy without Mercury's clarity behind it. All that fire, all that impulse, all that urgency. And the words haven't been keeping pace with the actual truth underneath them. Our messages have been reactive, our tone has been sharper than intended, and things have gotten complicated because of it. But Mercury retrograde at 15 degrees Aries, this is when the communication rewind begins. This is when you get the chance to go back to the conversations that didn't land and try again. Not with more force, not with a better argument, but with more honesty, with more precision, with more of the actual truth that's been underneath all the noise. So what does this reset actually look like in practice? I think it shows up in a few ways. First, there's going to be this really strong pull to clarify, to go back to misunderstandings that have been festering, to reach out to someone you've been meaning to talk to but haven't, to finish the conversation that got cut short or went sideways. Mercury retrograde in Aries rules over initiated conversations and personal declarations. And right now, it's asking which ones you got wrong. But it's not just about external communication. I think the deeper piece of this is about the conversation you're having with yourself. Because here's what I think has been happening. The internal narrative has been way too loud, way too reactive, and way too unkind. You've been running on a story, maybe about your capabilities, maybe about your worth, maybe about a relationship or a decision. And that story hasn't been fully examined. It's just been playing on repeat, driving choices you haven't fully owned. Mercury retrograde in Aries is giving you the chance to pause that loop, to actually listen to what you've been telling yourself and ask, is this true? Because when you slow down the inner dialogue long enough to examine it, you start to see where the distortion is, where the fear is masquerading as confidence, where the avoidance is masquerading as a plan. And that's where the real communication reset happens. Not in the words you say to others, but in the story you're willing to revise about yourself. So today, pay attention to what comes up in your conversations. Pay attention to what feels unfinished, what needs to be said, what needs to be heard. Because Mercury retrograde is going to keep surfacing it until you deal with it. And right now, you have the awareness to do it consciously. Which brings me to the second area of this retrograde's impact. Area 2. Your decisions are being called back for review. The second major shift happening right now is in how you make decisions, the plans you've set in motion, the directions you've chosen, the commitments you've made at speed. And if something has felt slightly off, like a choice you made that seemed right in the heat of the moment but has been nagging at you since, this is the energy that's putting that feeling into full focus. Here's the thing about Mercury in Aries that's really important to understand. When Mercury moves through Aries in its direct phase, it thinks fast, it decides fast, it cuts through hesitation and just goes. And that can be brilliant, but it can also be reckless. It can mean that decisions were made from impulse rather than from clarity, from urgency rather than from truth. And now that Mercury has stationed retrograde, now, today, in this moment, all those decisions are being placed back on the table, not necessarily to be reversed, but to be examined, to be confirmed or questioned, to be refined or released. I've been feeling this in my own life lately. That nagging sense that something I committed to earlier this season deserves a second look. Not because it's wrong, but because I moved into it fast enough that I didn't fully weigh what I was taking on. And I think a lot of you are feeling that same pull right now. This quiet but persistent signal that something needs to be reconsidered. So tomorrow, and in the days immediately ahead, expect things to resurface. Expect old options to reappear. Expect people from your past to come back into the picture with unresolved threads. This is not chaos. This is information. Mercury retrograde is bringing these things back into view so you can make cleaner, more conscious choices about them. But here's what I think is even more important. This retrograde is also illuminating where your decision-making process itself has been compromised, where you've been deciding from fear instead of from desire, where you've been saying yes because you're afraid of missing out rather than because it's genuinely aligned, where you've been committing to things that serve other people's timelines more than your own truth. Mercury at 15 degrees Aries is sharp. It cuts. And right now, it's cutting through the performance of decisiveness to get to the core of what you actually want. So if a decision has been feeling wrong, trust that instinct. If a plan needs revision, now is the time. And if something you started needs to be paused and reconsidered, this retrograde is giving you the exact window to do that, and the courage to do it honestly. Everything else, it can wait, or honestly, it can be released entirely. And part of this retrograde is also about making the ordinary decisions more intentional, not just the big dramatic ones. What are you unconsciously choosing every day? What are you automatically agreeing to? Where are your daily defaults not actually aligned with who you're becoming? That's the level Mercury is operating at right now. And when you address it at that level, the bigger picture shifts dramatically. Area 3. Your sense of identity gets recalibrated, and this might be the deepest one. The third shift happening today, right now with this station, is around identity. Who you believe yourself to be, how you've been presenting yourself, and whether the version of you that's been moving through the world lately is actually authentic. And I think for Aries, Libra, and Capricorn especially, this is where the deepest work of this retrograde is going to happen. Here's what I've been observing, and I think Mercury stationing in the middle of Aries is bringing this into sharp relief. So many of us have been performing a version of ourselves that's been shaped by momentum rather than by actual reflection. And we've been who we needed to be to keep things moving, to be taken seriously, to maintain appearances, to avoid the friction that comes from changing. And that performance has been exhausting. Maybe you've been presenting yourself as more certain than you actually feel, more put together, more over it, more fine. Maybe you've been leading with an identity, a role, a title, a persona, that once fit but is starting to feel tight. Like you've grown beyond it, but you haven't quite given yourself permission to acknowledge that publicly yet. I think today's Mercury station is forcing that acknowledgement. And here's what I believe is going to happen over the coming weeks of this retrograde. We're going to be given the clarity, sometimes uncomfortably, to see where our self-presentation has drifted from our actual self, where the mask has become the default, where the performance has started to cost more energy than it's returning. This is about dismantling whatever version of yourself you built in a hurry and asking what actually belongs in its place. You are more than the role you've been playing. That is the truth Mercury retrograde in Aries is here to remind you of. And when you really let that land, it changes everything. Suddenly, you're not defending a position just because you staked yourself to it. You're willing to say, I've thought about this more deeply and I've changed my mind. Suddenly, you're not holding on to an identity that stopped fitting just because changing it feels like admitting something. You're allowing yourself to evolve consciously rather than reluctantly. Suddenly, you're not suppressing the parts of you that don't fit the current story. You're integrating them. You're letting yourself be fuller, more honest, more real. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to have a full identity crisis over the next few weeks. That's not the point. But I do think this retrograde is going to show us where the self we've been projecting needs to come back into alignment with the self we actually are. Maybe it's one honest conversation. Maybe it's updating how you describe yourself and what you're doing. Maybe it's letting go of a title or a label that's been more limiting than liberating. Maybe it's just giving yourself permission to not have it all figured out. Whatever it is for you, Mercury Retrograde at 15 degrees Aries is giving you the reflective space to see what needs to shift, and the depth of Aries fire beneath it to actually make the move. And for Aries, Libra, and Capricorn, the signs feeling this most directly, this identity recalibration isn't a detour. It's the work, because you can't move forward with real momentum until you know who's actually doing the moving. The clarity of this retrograde is the foundation for everything that comes after it. Look, I'm not going to soften this for you. The next few weeks of Mercury retrograde in Aries are not going to feel comfortable. Aries energy combined with Mercury's backward motion creates this very specific kind of friction, where things that felt settled suddenly feel open again, where conversations you thought were finished come back around, where the path that seemed clear gets foggy. That is part of this. You might feel frustrated. You might feel like things are stalling that should be moving. You might feel caught between the impulse to push forward and the pull to review what you've already set in motion. And all of that is okay. All of that is exactly what this retrograde is designed to produce. Because real clarity doesn't come from constant forward motion. It comes from the willingness to pause long enough to actually see. But here's what I really want you to hold on to. This discomfort is productive. Yeah, and on the other side of it is something genuinely worth the work. Alignment, clarity, a version of yourself that's been tested and refined and is moving in a direction you've actually chosen consciously, not one you stumbled into at full speed. Today, with Mercury stationing retrograde, is your invitation to begin that process with intention, to take everything that's been moving fast and finally let yourself look at it clearly. What have you been saying that doesn't reflect what you actually mean? What decisions have you made that deserve a second, more honest look? What version of yourself have you been projecting that's ready to be updated? You don't have to resolve everything today. You don't have to have the answers right now. You just have to be willing to stop and actually ask the questions. Pick one area: your communication, your decisions, your sense of self, and bring it 1 degree of honesty deeper. That's all it takes to shift the energy. Because when you work with this retrograde instead of fighting it, when you honor what Mercury in Aries is actually asking you to do, everything starts to align underneath you. The words come out cleaner, the decisions get easier, the identity stops costing energy and starts generating it, and you finally get to move forward from a place that actually feels like you. So today, with Mercury stationing at 15 degrees Aries, pay attention to what surfaces, what's asking to be revisited, what conversation keeps coming back, what decision doesn't feel as settled as you told yourself it was, and then trust yourself enough to actually go there. All right, if you've stayed with me all the way through this, thank you, genuinely. If this hits something real for you and you want more of this kind of content, I would love it if you subscribed. It means more than you know, and it helps this reach the people who actually need to hear it. And drop something in the comments. I want to know, which of the 3 areas is Mercury retrograde targeting hardest for you right now? Is it your communication, your decisions, or your sense of identity? Tell me below. I read every single one. And I think we're all navigating this together. Take care of yourself through this retrograde. Do the honest work, and I'll see you in the next one.